I will call the Executive by Board to order for Tuesday, February 21st, 2023. Due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, in accordance with Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, public bodies otherwise governed by open meeting law are temporarily relieved from the requirement that meetings be held in public places, open and physically accessible to the public, as long as measures are taken to ensure public access to the body's deliberation through adequate alternative means. This meeting will be live on Zoom. The public may participate remotely by joining Zoom meeting ID number 854-0032-4335 or by calling 929-205-6099. For additional information about remote participation, please contact Carly Antonellis, Assistant Town Manager at ATM@Ayer.MA.US or 978-772-8220 extension 100 prior to the meeting. Excellent. Okay. First item of business we have today is review and approval of previous meeting minutes for October 25th and January 31st.
So, Mr. Chair, Robert, the October 25th have been up on the webpage for quite some time as draft, and we must have missed formally approving them. So that's why we're a little behind on those.
Understood. I'll take the motion.
Approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All right. Roll call the vote. Ms. Antonellis.
Aye.
Ms. Tierney.
Aye.
Mr. Pombriant.
Aye.
And the chair says aye. Minutes are approved. Next item on the agenda is town finances and budgeting status.
Mr. Chair, so not to give away the thunder and excitement from tonight's select board meeting, I'll keep it brief as this evening I will have a brief overview of draft number 2 of the omnibus budget, which everybody has as of last Friday. And I want to thank Barbara for coding that document. It's coded in orange where there's been increases or decreases. So we'll talk more about that this evening, and we continue to scrub that budget. There's been some progress made on the energy front. The health insurance was an unfortunate surprise, but we'll address that, and I'll talk more about that tonight under the draft 2 update. Also, as you know, Mr. Chair, the capital process has concluded at least its initial work at this time. It was a very productive series of meetings the last couple of months. And tonight, again, we'll just have a brief overview of the major capital items with the understanding that if the committee does need to convene again before town meeting due to some change, we will do that. Lastly, from my end, as everybody's aware, last Friday, the Department of Revenue, we got our certified free cash. A very special thanks to Carrie Cooper, our town accountant, and Barbara Tierney, our finance manager. Again, a very sort of healthy trend with 1.9 million in certified free cash for the general fund. Also strong showings in the enterprise for water at 4.6 million. Enterprise for sewer at 2.4, solid waste at 132,000, and the ambulance at 251,000. So what I would propose, Mr. Chair, maybe for our next by-board meeting, as we usually do this time of year, we have a discussion on sort of the recommended uses of free cash, and Barbara and I and others, if they want, can take sort of a look at that for our next meeting on some suggested uses on that. I mean, we know what some of the standards have been, and then the great question becomes, how much goes into which stabilization. So we're in pretty good shape on the budget end. The rate review committee has their meeting on February 28th, next Tuesday, where the consultant and the DPW director are going to present the rate recommendations for water and sewer that will be recommended to the select board. And the good news is the model has been updated, and Barbara tells me that moving forward, it's a much more usable document, if you will, in terms of the model. So some progress on that front. So through you, I don't know, Barbara, if you have anything to add on the town finances or the budget from your perspective.
To you, Scott, I did check with the town accountant just to verify that things look on trend. It's too early to tell if there's going to be any needs for RFTs. Everything looks fine, according to her right now. I also checked my revenues. Collections are, again, on trend. Revenues and collections have gone fine. We are about to mail out our first motor vehicle commitment, which is the largest of the year. So we really haven't had many collections yet, but it's coming next month. And that's all I have to report in addition to what Robert said.
All right, excellent. Thank you.
Thanks.
Carly, did I forget anything?
No,
All right.
Why does everyone look like it's a Tuesday after a long weekend?
with the select board meeting tonight.
Oh,
Tell me about
I'm
it.
jazzed up.
I remain pumped. 2 months from Friday is town meeting.
Oh, okay.
wow, that's coming quick.
So, Mr. Chair, that's sort of item 3 and 4 of the agenda. We sort of package the two. I think for the next meeting, if we could definitely talk about free cash recommendations, and as far as the 2024 budget process update, that second budget forum is on March 8th. Welcome any suggestions on content for that besides what we usually do. We'll try to give it obviously a new look, but any suggestions there. But other than that, I think we've covered 3 and 4.
Okay. All right, understood. Yeah, we'll have more discussion tonight at the select board meeting. So moving on to number 5, final review of the draft financial policies, updates and next steps to completion.
Okay, Mr. Chair, and I'm gonna try something new. I'm gonna use the shared screen. It's a first for me.
I'm right here if you need me.
All right, so I hit shared screen.
Yep,
Okay,
then find the document that you want to share.
okay.
You can do this.
Does it have to be on the,
Do you have it opened yet or no?
I have it open.
All right, so it should be one of your options.
Okay, let's see.
Or if you just quickly email it to me, I can share my screen.
Sorry, gang, 1 second.
All right.
Okay, Carl, I'm gonna send it over. That'll probably be best. So while we're just getting that up, Mr. Chair, so Barbara checked the version of the policies, which everybody has. It was the last document we all used that was highlighted in yellow and in blue. And if folks recall, blue was the last couple areas we needed to make a decision. And I have a couple slides for those 2 areas. Last time we had the network failure and couldn't show them on the screen. So here it comes, sorry. Once we get that up, there's basically 2 last areas for this version. One was, what are we gonna do, if anything, about the debt exclusion threshold under the capital policy? And then something about the cannabis policy, which I have some suggestions on the slides.
Okay, here, I just got it.
Okay. All right, so just the next one, Carly. So one of the last areas, at least for this review, and we all know that that's why we review and update these every 2 years, is that there's always, room for changes. Under the capital policy, the question came up about the debt exclusion threshold. And as all of us know, because we're involved with the capital process, we've seen last couple of years, the question has raised itself, do we increase that threshold that triggers a debt or capital exclusion? So as everyone knows, currently it's 350,000 in the policy. I looked at the evolution of that since we've had the formal, policies and reviews. Back in 2011, it was 250,000. In 2014, we upped it to 300,000. And then in 2019, it was upped to 350,000, where it is now. Next. So a lot has changed in a couple of years in involving our capital projects, not least of which the town continues to make a considerable proactive commitment to upgrading infrastructure and facilities, which is a true testament to the town. But just since the pandemic, we've seen, and the condition exists now, that's sort of affecting capital projects in the capital process. One is the increased costs for materials and energy and fuel has increased significantly since the pandemic. And the significance is, with respect to the threshold, is what you could get for 350,000 has changed significantly since then. We also know that we are in a period of record inflation. Hopefully that balances out and changes. Hopefully by the next 2 years, when we review this policy again, maybe that'll be a variable that we can take off the table. Supply chain issues are affecting our capital process. As everybody knows, for example, there's a ladder truck that is going to be subject to town meeting and ballot approval. Even upon approval, let's say on May 9th by the ballot for this ladder truck, we're looking at a 22-month delivery date on that. There have been other projects that the costs have either been significantly increased or the timing issues have been significantly impacted due to supply chain, which goes to the next one about delivery delays. And a lot of these things were not full realities up until a couple of years ago. And the last one, the phasing in of projects now has significant cost increases on projects. And I'm talking about phased in projects of which we've known about and that the committee has approved. We're finding that the issue of phasing in a project, doing design and then construction used to be the norm. Sometimes there's increased costs and so forth in that period of time between design and build. So there's a lot of things sort of affecting that $350,000 threshold that are pointing towards perhaps considering increasing that, at least for the next 2-year cycle. Next. So from the last couple of meetings, we're looking at a recommendation of increasing it from 350,000 to 500,000. And the research that I've done and Barbara has done, most towns in Massachusetts appear to use a percentage of the debt service to the total budget somewhere between 10% to 20% as a threshold, as opposed to a specific amount. The issue with the threshold, from my perspective, is it's somewhat ambiguous, and it assumes, like this group, I think there'd be great trust in the current town government to stick to that percentage. However, I think our policy, though unique, does make sense that it spells out the dollar cap. So I bring that up. We looked at a lot of towns, and what we were seeing is more of a percentage of the threshold as opposed to a specific amount. And I just point out, and I thank Barbara for this calculation, the Ayers FY23 debt service was at about 5.23%. One that I did find, the town of Sudbury, not quite comparable to the town of Ayer. Their debt exclusion threshold was, they call it a threshold target, was actually of 1.5 million. I'm not advocating that. I'm not advocating that. So again, I mean, the other intent of the debt exclusion, and we've been pretty, at least in my tenure, have been very consistent in using it for major projects. I think factoring in the current climate, at least for the next 2 years, an increase to 500,000 would be reasonable and realistic. I think also it's important to note that even items that would fall below the 500,000 are still subject to the capital planning process, still subject to review by the FinCom, still subject to the select board actually authorizing it to be on the warrant, and finally still subject to town meeting. So I think somewhere between 350,000 to 500,000. If folks aren't quite comfortable going to 500,000, I mean, even 450,000 would be progress on that. So I definitely think that we will, in 2 years, when we review all of the policies, this will definitely be in order, because hopefully, and who knows, a lot happens in 2 years. The economic situation may be different. So that was one area, is whether or not we want to, one of the last items was to increase that threshold. And then what I put on the bottom, currently, as you're all familiar, in the capital process, what determines that it's capital, or the criteria, is a one-time expenditure of $10,000 or more with a life cycle. I forget what it's set forth in the policy, but it talks the life cycle. And the question,
I think it's 5 years.
yeah, it is 5 years. So anything 10,000 and over, life cycle of 5 years is considered capital. We talked again, well, sort of the similar logic on the debt exclusion. Obviously, costs on everything has gone up and so forth. And when we looked at all of the towns on this area, interestingly, they were all over the place, but they were all within 10 to 20,000, which I found interesting. I thought I'd find folks maybe at 50,000 or 100,000, but all of the towns we looked at, most of them were 10,000, some were 15,000, and some were 20,000. It's about an equal, split across the board. So we seem to be pretty much on target there. From my vantage point, I think, again, it's up to, do we want to increase that, for the next 2 years, taking into account the various factors I just discussed, and revisit it, change it to 20,000 or to 15,000, or just leave it at 10,000. Again, I think increasing it to 20,000, again, the town has the appropriate processes and safeguards in it, that there's a level of control and monitoring on it. It could be helpful, but I defer to the buy board on that. But I was surprised, maybe folks haven't updated their policies yet, or doing the same thing we did, that they were in the universe of 10 to 20,000, equally split amongst 10, 15, and 20,000. So that was, if you will, we had two items. Those were the two pieces of the capital policy that was outstanding on that document.
Okay. Thank you, Robert. So my thoughts on the debt exclusion, capital exclusion threshold, I think 500 is a more realistic number given the environment that we're in. And also, I think also with the type of projects that we have, we need to, I think, leverage giving the voters the right to voice their opinion through the dual system on certain projects. However, I think we get into like a year we've had this year, it can also hinder us from an operational perspective to try to, if we have three or four projects that are, say, just over $350,000, it creates a more harsh political environment to try to get those items complete. So I'm all for the 500,000 as the threshold on that. And sorry, go ahead.
I said, I agree with that. I mean, the 350,000 nowadays can't buy you much anyway.
No,
And this year's capital, just like you said, we're lining up for ballot question after ballot question, so.
Yeah, to you, Scott, through you. I agree with the 500,000 after looking at some different CPI calculators I found out on different websites and the US labor statistics. I think 500,000 will be a good number.
all right, excellent. Do I have an official motion to update the policy draft with that?
So moved.
Second,
All right, I'll roll call the vote. Ms. Antonellis,
Aye.
Ms. Tierney,
aye.
Mr. Pompriand,
Aye.
and the chair says aye. Is unanimous 4-0. And then the second piece, so raising the threshold from 10,000 to 20,000. So looking at the capital for this year, there's only 3 items that were below 20,000. So it's not like there's going to be a lot of things kind of removed from the capital process per se. I think one of the primary differences from when I first started doing this, like we'll just say a long time ago. And I'll go back to the example. I think it was the first or second year on finance committee where the Parks Department needed a new tractor, which I think the threshold at that time was like $5,000, and it was like $5,500. And within the budget, Parks was basically told they had to just find it in their regular budget. So I think if we're going to increase this threshold to 20, which I'm all for, we've also gotten to a good way or a good methodology with budgeting where we do recognize these one-time expenses that come up, put it into the operating budget itself, and then we kind of strip that out in the next year. So it's not, I think a lot of people seem to think like as soon as a department gets a budget level in the omnibus, that's their baseline for next year. And that's not always the case. So I'm all for increasing the threshold for what is capital to $20,000 with a 5-year lifespan. Any other comments or thoughts?
I agree with that. Same reasoning. I mean, just as an example, our desk furniture, when Robert and I upgraded, it was a one-time expense, but it was almost like $13,000 for 2 desks. Yeah. It's crazy.
I mean, I could have driven you to IKEA, but
exactly.
you had to put it together yourself.
I don't do well with those.
So for me, I'm fine with updating to the 20,000. As we know, if we were in a tight year or something couldn't be handled in the regular operational budget, we always have the option to advise differently from year to year. And so I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I agree, Scott. You hit on one of the key points. I looked to, there were only 3 items this year. So I think there's appropriate control. And also, as Barbara mentioned, we ask in the budget preparation directive, as everybody knows anyway, for any, costs that are usually one-time costs above 10,000, we know it's going to go to capital, but we ask them to flag it as well. So I think we're on safe ground for the next 2 years of going to the 20,000.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Do I have a motion to modify the draft to 20,000 and a 5-year useful life?
So moved.
I'll second.
All right. Thank you. Roll call the vote. Ms. Tierney,
Aye.
Ms. Antonellis,
Aye.
Mr. Pompriand,
Aye.
and the chair says aye. Unanimous 4-0.
And then the last, Carly, if you just move my slide one more.
Yep.
So the other area that was still outstanding was the cannabis policy. The issue of cannabis came since we last did the review, as I mentioned. Barbara has confirmed with DOR that the cannabis funds, like the local meals tax, they are general fund revenues. So obviously they go into the general fund when we get them. However, my third bullet, like the local meals tax, the town could develop a policy for these funds subject to the action authorization of town meeting, which we've done with the local meals tax for OPEB for several cycles. And I think that has worked well and has served the town well. So I just took a stab at, we talked about putting something in the policies, this version, to market. The town's local cannabis funds shall be deposited in the general fund, subject to an annual recommendation by the buy board to transfer and deposit into the town's stabilization and or capital stabilization funds each year, subject to approval by town meeting. I know it's very basic and obvious to all of us that deal with this weekly, but I was trying to think of something to market. Again, at this time, from my perspective, I mean, we could, with the cannabis, and you could put it towards towards OPEB. I was just thinking, I know Scott had brought up a few times in the past, and I do agree, further building up, capital stabilization with it. So it's sort of a dealer's choice as far as what you want to do with it. But that was just a pass from my perspective. Doesn't have to be that, but we did say we wanted to put something in this version of the policy to acknowledge the cannabis at this time.
I think that's fine for this version. I think as the cannabis funds stabilize for the 2 years from now, we'll see how much it is and where maybe redirect it if at that point.
Yeah, I agree that the money's definitely less and less compared to what we were seeing. So, but I like that there's some flexibility to either go into regular or the capital stabilization.
Yep. So the only other thing I thought just to throw out there is we definitely want to, in my opinion, put a blurb of that it's DOR, general fund money, just to define it. And I like either putting it into a stabilization or even just saying we want to do a 5-year analysis of the funds and decide next time. That was my only other thought on that, knowing that it's general fund money. But I'm open to either one.
So, Mr. Chair, to Barbara's point, I can clarify in that the DOR recommendation. I think that's helpful.
Okay.
And I'm not opposed either. I mean, I think we should do, as Barbara mentioned, I think we should do the analysis, regardless of what we decide today.
Yeah, I like the idea of throwing it into stabilization and capital, and then just maybe, or we can just keep it in the back of our minds that for next time we'll have a good 5-year loop of funding, and we can always change it at that time.
Yeah.
That works.
Yeah, I think it's a good approach.
Agree.
Okay. Do we have a motion to add that to the policy draft? Please.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to include that.
I'll second.
All right, thank you. Roll call the vote. Ms. Antonellis,
Aye.
Ms. Tierney,
Aye.
Mr. Pompriand,
Aye.
and Chair says aye. Unanimous 4-0. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, with that,
Yes.
I'm pleased to report that completes, if you will, a comprehensive and substantive review and update of the policies. I would propose at this point, then there are basically 2 more steps. One is to send it, to all departments in the public would, put it on the budget page, send it out for interdepartmental review, and then it needs to be approved. They need to be approved by the Finance Committee and the Select Board. And Carly and I were talking briefly this morning. We were thinking, it'd be nice if we could tee it up for the end of March for the Select Board. And I was hoping someone from FinCom would be here, but they have their next meeting is on March 1st. I'd reach out to the chair and see, they're going to have a couple meetings in March. They're meeting with police on March 1st and DPW on March 15th. If maybe they would, if they would consider taking this up in March, and some of us, I know I plan to go, or some of us would go to give sort of an overview. We could get this teed up and hopefully for approval by the end of March, beginning of April at the latest, and then we would be signing.
Okay. No, it sounds like a good approach.
Okay, so I don't think we need a motion. What we'll do this week is Barbara's got it pretty much in final form. We'll drop these changes from today in. We'll get that out for an interdepartmental review. We'll give them a specific deadline of a couple of weeks. And then I'll check with FinCom. We'll also send it to all of the Select Board, and we'll shoot for the end of March.
All right. Excellent. Thanks everyone that put the hard work into this. I know, Barbara, you took point on the document itself and all the extra research that had to be done over the last couple of months. Greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else on policies before we move ahead?
No, I'm good.
No. All right. So next item is new business items and topics for future board meetings. Currently, I don't have anything to add myself. I'll open it up to everyone else.
I don't have anything.
Now, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in the beginning, just for the next meeting, I think a discussion on the recommended uses of free cash for FY24, as well as further discussion, I think, on the FY24 budget, specifically that next budget forum, but also the budget book and town meeting prep.
Okay. All right. So moving on, next item is scheduling our next meeting. So when's the budget forum?
The 8th.
March 8th.
So do we want to meet in 2 weeks then, ahead of time, to look at the presentation? Would that
Yeah.
be beneficial?
Yeah, if we could meet the 7th at 2, assuming folks are available.
Yeah.
We could do two things. One, we can have the discussion on the free cash, which will be helpful for the presentation on the 8th. And we can sort of even maybe run through a draft of the presentation and get your feedback on the look and content. And then I think the third item is we should start to talk about town meeting prep. So that would work if people can meet on the 7th at 2.
All right. Yeah, that works for me.
Yep.
All right.
All right. Great.
Yep. Awesome.
All right. Okay. So that's all we have on the agenda. I'll open it up for any further questions or comments.
I'm good.
If there aren't any, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn at 2:35.
I'll second.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. I'll roll call the vote. Ms. Antonellis,
Aye.
Ms. Tierney,
Aye.
Mr. Pompriand,
Aye.
and the chair says aye. Thanks very much for all your time and hard work today.